And so now we're going to look at chapter 7, 8, 9 and 10. It starts obviously with chapter 7, which is from the perspective and the voice of Lydia. Lydia is the daughter of Mr. Whitechapel. So she is the plantation owner's daughter. These chapters investigate and explore the relationship of Lydia and Chapel, which begins as a platonic friendship. It says here in the first sentence, I begin as his big sister. So Lydia starts off having feelings of sisterly feelings, friendship and camaraderie. But beginning as the big sister kind of implies that this changes, and we discover as the chapters go on that it develops into a romantic relationship. And so in the first chapter and the voice of Lydia, Lydia decides to teach him to read. And it's a secret. She puts her fingers to her lips. Shh. Okay. And here in the middle of page 81, we see how excited Chapel is as he begins to read. So you can see here, he says them all with the same exhilarated voice. He's close to shouting them out. So he's excited about learning. And later on we read here, this is the day he reads to me, not a few words, but page after page with occasional help. He's very intelligent. He's learnt so quickly to read. And the next page. This appears later on as well, but Lydia has a real sense of injustice at illiteracy. She recognises the right to be literate for all people. So she's taught him to read but not write, and she realises she's been foolish. And so here she teaches him to write as well as read. And then it moves on to chapter 8, which is there the voice of Cook, so Chapel's mother. And she hears him reading. Down the bottom here, she says she hears a voice that's my son's and not my son's. I hear my son's voice as speaking as I have never heard it before. He sounds as if he is standing at a pulpit, or like the master sounds when he says prayers to the whole plantation. He sounds confident. He sounds intelligent. There's this tone of pride, but also surprise at Chapel reading. Chapel speaking. Words from a book. Here, my Chapel. My Chapel. Here is the sense of pride here. He's mine, my son. Okay. And then later over on page 85, here it's even more direct, talking about the pride in her son. All I feel inside is pride. Not fear, not yet. Just pride. It's swelling my chest and filling my heart. My son can open a book and sound like the master. I stare at the pot and smile. So this sense of pride here from Chapel's mother. And later at the bottom of 85 is when the worry starts. Okay? He's just out of my sight when a worry replaces him. Okay? She's proud but fearful. Books will only bring you trouble. But she doesn't want to stop him reading, and she doesn't want to get Whitechapel to do it either. She decides to keep his secret. She knows that if she tells Whitechapel, "Husband, I love you and tell you everything. There's one thing I cannot tell you because I know what you would do if you knew about it. You would tell my son that he cannot read." Okay. And so there's this contrast here. Whitechapel's fear contrasted with Cook's hope for their son. And so she decides to keep it a secret. And here, chapter 9, if you turn over there. Here is the beginning of the romance between Lydia and Chapel. She's listening to his voice, Chapel's voice, and she realizes that she's in love with the cadence. Now, this is 2 years in, 2 years after she starts teaching him to read. But then Mr. Whitechapel walks in. So this is what we read at the end of chapter 5, Chapel, where that is in poetry form. It's described there as well from Chapel's perspective, but we're reading this same point from Lydia's perspective. So father walks in, her father walks in and sees them reading together. She's reading Shakespeare's plays, and he yells at them both. She's scared for Chapel. But she also realizes that she's in love with him. He's 3 years younger than her, but she's in love with him, in love with a slave, and Chapel is in trouble because of me. And the father says that they must not read together, they must not write, must not sit together in the house, they must not write notes to each other, and they must not speak of it to anybody. And he says, "You have done him a grave injustice by teaching him to read and write." Now here, Lydia says, or wants to say, a law which says a slave should not read and write is unjust. So I made a note here. Lydia's political belief, her belief in the right for slaves to be literate, for slaves to be able to read and write, that was not a popular view at the time, but it shows a range of beliefs that were held at the time, that there were people who believed in the rights of slaves to be literate and the rights of slaves to be free. They just faced such great peer pressure. Their views were so rare or so uncommon that it was very hard for their voices to be heard at the time. And then Cook arranges a bit of a secret meeting. She kind of suggests that there's a special place that you can look at the heavens, and when Lydia goes out, she finds there is Chapel. And they agree to meet regularly or meet again. And because he's promised, he's honourable, Chapel is honourable, he cannot disobey the command, the promise he made to Mr. Whitechapel. He gave him his word, so he won't read or write, but he asks Lydia to memorise something, kind of like getting around a bit of a loophole of that promise he made. Chapel, I want to say, all my memory is yours. Again, there's another link there to the title, The Longest Memory. So Lydia decides she will devour father's library. she will fill her head with your words, and they declare their love for each other. They even decide to face back to back so that they're not facing each other. That's along here somewhere too. If we go on to chapter 10. So Lydia grows into a woman, and as a woman, she has this parade of men coming through the house, a stream of visits by eminent, eligible young men. So the marriage is to be arranged. There's this implication that that's the role for women, that they have no other role other than to get married. There's no other thing that girls can do. But she compares each of those men to Chapel, and none are as intelligent. None have his wit, charm, or sensitive nature, not one. And she disagrees with them all with their views on slavery, all of the men that she meets. Her father tries to convince her to get married. Here, talking in metaphors here, but she says, well, I'm not ready. But she's speaking in metaphors. What a shame to force a sapling to become a tree before it's ready to blossom. She's basically saying, I'm not ready to get married yet. Page 95. She's now here wishing that he were white or that she were black. That's because at the time, obviously, biracial marriages were not accepted. And so there was no way for them to be together. They were from very different worlds. And here, Thomas, who is Lydia's brother, comes back from the north, that's the north of the United States, and tells stories of free blacks associating with white women, and there is venom in his tone, there's poison in his tone, and distaste in his face. So we see his shock. It is unacceptable at the time in the South. Now she, Lydia, is disguising her smile. So she's excited about that. She's happy to hear that, but she has to hide her reaction. And she hears about this heaven on earth from her brother. She calls it heaven on earth. So we see here, this is paradise. Remember in the first chapter, Whitechapel says why they keep talking about this paradise. Well, here we learn where Chapel has gotten this idea, where Chapel gets the idea that there is a place, paradise, that he can run away to. And there's a reference up here to Shakespeare's plays. And there's definitely a connection to Romeo and Juliet, or a comparison between the story of Romeo and Juliet from two families that were enemies, the Montagues and the Capulets, and here in the story of Lydia and Chapel, that society would never allow them to be together. And for the first time in their secret meetings, Chapel faces Lydia in defiance of the ban. So that promise is made. He kisses her and he says, I cannot live this way. So Lydia says, think about going to the north. She's trying to convince him that there is a place where she can be happy there. Now, Lydia is romantic. She's full of idealism. But the modern reader perhaps can see and question, would he really be able to run away together? And she's making a plan here to run away as well, travel separately up north and then meet each other. Now we know how venomous, you look up here, how much venom up there, how much venom there was and distaste there was at the romances between the black and the white up north from Thomas, her brother. Don't know whether, I think from a modern reader, we think perhaps Thomas or the father wouldn't allow her to run away. But her idealistic view, Lydia's idealistic view, believes that she can actually find a new life with Chapel. So they decide they're going to run away together. He said he's hoping it wouldn't come to this. He didn't want to disobey his father, but his love is so strong for Lydia that no one, not his father, not her father, not even his mother, can stop. He decides, north. We're going north to paradise, 2 new guests. Okay. So they make a plan to run away to the north together. And Lydia, kind of gets herself an invitation or to go with her brother back north. So she's making her plans to go. She convinces her father to let him go. She says her reason that she's met all the men in the south and she's not impressed, so she has to go north to find a man. Mother hears about it and says no, but then the top of page 101, Lydia says, Mum, you should come too. Mother, you should accompany me. Chapel says, oh, this is a bad idea. Your mother will not let us run away. She will keep an eye on you. She will soldier you. And Lydia says, do you think I'm not a better planner than that? This is the best response that you can muster. Okay. So she continues to make her plan by investigating what sort of accommodation there is. She talks about the fact that black people cannot live alone, since they might get harassed, but also because people might try and sell them even if they say they're free. And that made me think about 12 Years a Slave, where that happens, where he's a free man who gets kidnapped and then sold and becomes a slave. So there's more of this plan together. Lydia's going to give him money for food. He's going to dress properly. So there's a big plan here. They start dreaming about having children together. Chapel has a dream that he's going to write verses for a living. He's going to become a poet. And we begin to understand more perhaps the fact that his chapter is written in poetry. And this incredibly romantic tone is seen here at the end. It's hopeful, optimistic, perhaps naive. There's no verse that can express the depth of his feeling. And the very end of this chapter is Lydia talking about how Chapel's going to make their children's lives rich. And we know, obviously, because we know that Chapel ends up dying, we know with a sense of sadness that this will never come to pass. So that's the end of chapter 7, 8, 9 and 10. Hopefully you've got some good notes for your analysis table that you can use in your essay.